Welcome to the panel on jurisdictional approaches to REDD Plus and low emissions development. I'm William Boyd. I teach at the Law School at the University of Colorado, and I am the project lead for the Governor's Climate and Forest Task Force, which is a coalition of 22 states and provinces from 7 different countries around the world working on jurisdictional approaches to REDD Plus and low emissions development. I want to thank NICFI and NORAD and Francis Seymour and the conference organizers for the wonderful event, for the opportunity to be here. We've got a great panel this morning, and I think one thing we can say for sure is that the jurisdictional approach is quite popular with women, so that's a very good thing. I'm going to briefly introduce the panelists and then offer a few framing remarks before engaging in discussion with them, and then we'll go back and forth in a structured conversation. And then we want to open it up to the audience, and we really do want to hear from all of you. We want to stay focused also on our mandate to think hard and concretely about the way forward and about who needs to do what Francis was talking about yesterday in the plenary session. So to my left, Elsa Escobar from the Fundación Natura in Colombia. To her left, Rosa Maria Vidal from Pro Natura Sur in Mexico. To her left, Francesca de Gaspares from the Greenbelt Movement in Kenya. And finally, all the way down, Monica Julicia de los Rios de Leal from the Acre state government in Brazil. So let me just say a couple of things about the jurisdictional approach and then allow my distinguished panelists to take over. So obviously the jurisdictional approach, as the name suggests, starts with a jurisdiction, with the idea of governance over a particular territory. It can be local level, municipal level, district or county level, state or provincial level, and even national level. And the basic idea is that government or governance is a critical part of any effort to promote low emissions development at scale and in a manner that is sustainable over time. In this respect, it differs, obviously, from private sector approaches such as sustainable supply chain efforts or individual projects, though it's obviously compatible with those and I would argue synergistic with those efforts and vital to making them work over the long term. Now, much of our focus today in this panel is going to be on jurisdictional approaches at the subnational level, which provide important pathways to and pillars of robust national programs, particularly in big, complicated countries like Brazil, Mexico, Indonesia. But it's certainly not exclusive to the subnational level. In some countries, a full-blown national level approach may make sense from the beginning. This was the original idea behind REDD. What we've realized, though, is that in other countries, we really need states and provinces and counties and districts and municipalities to make this work. That REDD has to go all the way down if it is going to work. Now, one thing we can say with confidence is that the jurisdictional approach is harder, it's messier, it's more difficult than projects, in part because it is so much more ambitious. But I think if REDD is ever going to work, it is going to be in large part because governments at multiple levels have built robust, effective jurisdictional programs, which takes time. This is not obviously going to be something that happens quickly or easily. You can think of the jurisdictional approach in this sense as the glue or the connective tissue that holds this together, right? That is, it allows for vertical policy alignment and coordination between communities, local and regional governments and national governments, and also for horizontal policy alignment within and across governments. So as Monica is going to talk about with the example of Acre, they're building their approach into policies and programs across the government, from housing to agro-industry. As Rosa will talk about in the case of Mexico, they are focusing on the state-level approach as a way to coordinate and serve as an intermediary between community efforts and the national-level approach. Now, the jurisdictional approach also starts from the recognition that this is not a download, right? There's not a one-size-fits-all here, that whatever international policy architecture takes shape, whatever national policies and programs emerge, these cannot simply be downloaded into lower levels of governance. That different manifestations of a jurisdictional approach are emerging in different places, There are common elements, to be sure, and we'll talk about some of those this morning. There are obviously opportunities for cross-fertilization, but any successful jurisdictional program has to get worked out in a way that makes sense in the specific context. It has to grow out of the vernacular institutions of a particular place. And today's panel is a good example of that. We'll hear from Elsa and from Francesca about two very specific jurisdictional approaches in Colombia and Kenya, respectively, that really are growing out of kind of the particular set of circumstances and constraints in those areas. And we need to recognize that this kind of diversity is a strength, that higher level policy architectures need to be flexible enough to accommodate this diversity and to draw strength from this diversity. The jurisdictional approach also recognizes, of course, that governance is broader than government, that the links between civil servants and their civil society partners are critical, right? It's the network of actors that make this possible and sustain it over time, particularly in the face of political turnover. All of this, too, can be a very important source of policy innovation. In the United States, we talk about the states as the laboratories of democracy. That's where a lot of the policy ideas and policy innovations come from. And if we look beneath the big international and national processes on REDD, we see an immense amount of policy innovation happening. It's very inspiring. And these innovations need to be nurtured and supported. We need to learn from them. We need to diffuse the lessons from these as models for others. We need to also, though, learn from the things that are not working, and we need to be able to have very frank discussions about failed approaches. Which brings me to the last point. This is all very fragile. Jurisdictional programs have to make political sense for governors and others facing elections. Political turnover is a huge but unavoidable challenge. Without support and a clear sense of payoff and benefits, the whole thing unravels. So political viability is extremely important in thinking about a successful jurisdictional approach, and strengthening the connections between civil servants and civil society underneath the political level to ensure continuity over time is also a very important sort of institutional consideration when we think about jurisdictional approaches. So I want to turn now to our panelists. I'm going to start with Elsa. Elsa's going to speak in Spanish, so for those of you who want interpretation, now would be the time to put on your mechanism. And then we'll go down the line here. And so I'll remind our panelists, too, to speak slowly and into the microphone. You have a microphone for the interpreters. Okay, so Elsa, you've been involved in an effort to build a jurisdictional program for low emissions development at the municipal level in Colombia, the Municipios Carbon Zero Initiative. Tell us a bit about that effort and how it fits within the broader context of what's happening in Colombia, and specifically about some of the key lessons that you've learned in building this effort and the key challenges going forward.
Gracias, William. Buenos días a todas y todos. Déjenme comenzar un segundo por decirles algo de la Fundación Natura. Es una organización no gubernamental que trabaja en Colombia por 30 años buscando y entregando alternativas para la conservación y el uso de la biodiversidad. Entonces, como pueden entender, el tema del cambio climático es integral. Cuando estamos hablando, me dices, del contexto de Colombia, tenemos 43 millones de habitantes y alrededor de 1.200 municipios. Y es uno de los países que ha sido identificado como más vulnerable ante el cambio climático. O sea, la propuesta que estamos haciendo es una propuesta desde los municipios para volver, para que realmente podamos tener unas ciudades, unos municipios, unos paisajes mucho más resilientes. Realmente esto recoge todo lo que se habló ayer, pero es una intervención totalmente integrada. Es una nueva estrategia realmente para tener un manejo integral del cambio climático. Para eso hemos propuesto como 10 líneas de acción o 10 acercamientos. Una de ellas, y creemos que es fundamental, es el cambio de la cultura ciudadana. Tenemos que crear conciencia porque no son los gobiernos o las organizaciones gubernamentales, sino que estamos proponiendo una intervención de todos los pobladores de ese municipio. Pero también consideramos que toda esta gestión integral del cambio climático tiene que estar involucrada en los planes de desarrollo, en los planes de acción, en los planes, en las diferentes planificaciones que hacen los municipios y que hacen las regiones. Lógicamente tenemos que hablar de restauración de ecosistemas degradados, de lo cual se habló ayer bastante, y también de tener unos sistemas productivos sostenibles como manera de adaptación y mitigación al cambio climático. Pero el agua es un factor clave, es un recurso estratégico para este trabajo de hacer municipios que estén mucho más preparados hacia el fenómeno del cambio climático. También la gestión de los recursos, el manejo de los recursos, donde tenemos mucho trabajo por hacer, pero también la creación de esa conciencia ciudadana del buen uso de los recursos y un consumo responsable. Si estamos hablando de cambio climático, debe haber un compromiso sobre la medición de la huella de carbono municipal y la suma de todas estas estrategias con unos indicadores muy claros que demuestren cómo se está realmente disminuyendo esa huella de carbono. Pero la participación ciudadana es totalmente fundamental, como lo dije desde un principio, pero lo más importante de todo esto es el compromiso del municipio, de las autoridades municipales, de las autoridades regionales y de un apoyo total del gobierno nacional. Colombia es un estado central que está dividido en departamentos y está dividido en municipios. Y por eso toda esta línea que lleve a apoyar una transformación municipal es lo que creemos que es una buena propuesta y una propuesta para hacer unas ciudades mucho menos vulnerables hasta el fenómeno del cambio climático.
Thank you, Elsa. I think that's a very important point that you made at the very end there, that Colombia is not a federal system. Some of the other experiences we'll be talking about are in the context of a federal system, and jurisdictional approaches obviously look quite different in those two contexts. That was great. Thank you very much. Rosa, I want to turn to you now. You've been working with several states in southern Mexico in a number of different capacities, including your role as Mexico coordinator for the GCF. Tell us about the current thinking and approaches to jurisdictional programs in Mexico and how this fits into the larger context within Mexico, key challenges, key lessons.
Thank you, William. Good morning, everybody. As Elsa was mentioning, in the case of Mexico, my organization is Pro Natura, also an NGO, very similar of Natura in Colombia. We're a national organization and we have regional offices, and in that capacity we have been working towards promoting REDD at national level, but also looking at what is the options for the states to get involved. And as has been presented in this conference, REDD implies a lot of challenges. It goes directly to changes in a lot of the structural processes within the jurisdictions.
Yeah.
It questioning policies from agriculture, but also participation, democracy, land tenure, many different aspects. And of course, it takes time. It is not going to be easy and quickly. So thinking in what Francis told us about thinking in this process of talking each other during these days, on thinking us as a team and what are like the things that we are doing well. I think in Mexico we are doing well many things. One is that we are putting REDD in the context of sustainable development, rural development, and not thinking REDD only in the compensation or the money that is going to come in the future out of reduction of emissions, but really thinking in REDD as the commitment for changing the way that we do things in the rural communities. So that is one. And I think that is a very important one, that is a shared vision in all the country. The other one is like looking at other different sources of money. And in the case of Mexico, one of that potential source of money is changing the subsidies that goes to cattle ranching mainly. We have a lot of money that is being allocated for, we'll say, deforestation activities, no? Like very extensive cattle, other different types of subsidies. So that's another opportunity for a jurisdiction to really get involved and change that pattern of allocation. The other good thing that we are doing is talking with at the different levels of the governance. One, of course, are the communities and the ejidos, and the other one are municipios, as we have this a proposal coming from the federal government in organizing REDD through what is called juntas intermunicipales, intermunicipality arrangements, and then the states and the federation. It hasn't been easy, this conversation, but it's happening. We just have last week a training course in which part of the results was the decision of the federal government in working very specifically in how to nest the MRB from the state level to the national level, and how to allocate targets for emission reductions in the states. Mm-hmm. So that gives the states a clear field to work. I mean, they know what is the type of activities that they can do after finding the allocations that they will have for emission reductions. The other good thing that we are doing is working at the landscape level. Mm-hmm. We are not focusing on projects, but understanding the landscape in a more broader scale, like understanding the relationships of the specific cultural uses of land and the specific restrictions of biodiversity or opportunities of biodiversity in the landscapes. And that is also a good thing that we are doing. What are the things that we need to change, or the things that we need to improve if we really want to win this game, REDD? One, I think, will be really to think who is going to pay for these changes. I mean, who are the ones that really need to, or that we are putting all the pressure? And yesterday I was worried about listening people saying, well, we need to educate the people in the communities on how to reduce the impacts of their agriculture. Maybe. But it's not only education, it's not only transfer of technology, it's really how to make these activities to be cost effective for them. Changing the way of the use of the land, it requires an investment. And I'm worried that we are probably putting that investment in the shoulders of the people in the communities instead of really sharing the cost along all the involved people, like consumers, of course, the market and the companies that are using the commodities. So we need to think how to integrate that cost in all the chain, and that the beneficiaries are the ones that have to take the decision of changing the way that they use the land. So that is one thing that I think is a real challenge. Of course, it's how we are going to make REDD in a way that is not very heavy in terms of the structures that it requires. So so REDD is it's flexible, but also it's not very costly, so we can really channel the resources to the beneficiaries. And how we are going to build new institutions. As you said in your introduction, institutions to last for long term, and that also facilitate involvement of stakeholders and the NGOs or the civil society. So I think those are the challenges to come.
And can you, just to follow up, talk about any specific examples of how you're trying to build those institutions to maintain that continuity, particular ways of organizing?
Well, I think that we're still on that process. I had a chance yesterday for talking with one of Congress lady that is here in this meeting from Mexico. So we're talking with the Congress on how to do this, because you have to do some reforms in the law. You have to create new institutions, and not only in terms of, the national legislation and the state legislation, but really to change the way that institutions are built. For example, having more public-private type of institutions in which in the governance body you can have represented not only the government, but also civil society and probably universities and private sector that provide a basis for a way to transparent the process of using and allocate resources, but also to be able to evaluate in the long term the efficiency of these institutions. So it's something that is happening in Mexico, but still it is in the process.
And one more follow-up question. Can you say a little bit about how the different states are working with each other and the difference that makes as part of this process? Both with the nesting challenges and also with the sort of local level community.
Yeah, well, in the case, there are many things happening right now in Chiapas. For example, as you know, we are signed an MOU with California, and that, of course, provide some pressure internally in the government to really try to improve performance, and at the same time facilitate somehow the dialogue with the federal government, because the federal government is questioning, okay, how are you going to do this? So that's one case. The other case is the Yucatan Peninsula, in which 3 states has been coming together, and they created a regional REDD program. And they're, for example, trying to find a way to establish a fund, funding, for example, from the oil sector, Pemex, can be allocated to go directly to the forest. So these type of arrangements are happening, and we also are trying to build a kind of coalition of southern states of Mexico, so they can present themselves in the group of states that own the tropical forest and can have a dialogue with the Congress, for example. So many different type of arrangements.
Great. And you're right in the middle of all of that, too.
Yeah.
Francesca, you've been instrumental in the Greenbelt movement's efforts to build jurisdictional approaches in Kenya focused on kind of the connections between communities and watersheds. Is a very interesting approach. Can you tell us a bit more about that effort and some of the key lessons, but also challenges that you've taken from that?
Thanks, William. Yes, good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to have the opportunity to be on this panel, to talk with colleagues in the other parts of the Global South who are a little bit further along than we are. But we do have some really specific lessons from our work in Kenya. Just to give you a little bit of background, obviously I'm not from Kenya, but I have been, until very recently, the Europe director of the Greenbelt movement. And I worked for a long time with Greenbelt movement since 2005. The Kenya situation is one of very few standing forests left, less than 2%, which used to be around 30 to 40%. And the country is very dependent on the water and resources that come out of those forests, which provide hydropower, so electricity to the major cities as well as water. The Greenbelt movement was founded by Wangari Maathai in 1977. And it started looking at the issue that rural women were facing, which is lack of water and firewood. Already you're seeing severe deforestation at that time. And over time, through a process of education and empowerment and thinking about what can rural people do to address the issues that they're facing, a network of over 4,000 tree nursery groups were formed. And it grew over the years and started looking at issues around rights and became a social change model within Kenya. And it was for that holistic approach that Wangari Maathai was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004. And really, we became what was a national organization to having some international offices, of which I became a part of. So that's a little bit about our background. We've been working on climate-funded projects in Kenya since 2006. And so we've done a number of pilot projects really looking at how can we use funding from climate change to help address the developmental issues that rural women and communities are facing, and really impact how the ecosystems in Kenya are functioning. So we, about 3 years ago, moved our approach from project-based to look at watersheds. So we're using a jurisdictional approach that is ecological in its boundaries. And we've used this approach to really identify critical watersheds that provide the essential services that both the rural people and the urban communities are using. And that's around water, their livelihoods, and life quality issues. So we've had some successes and some challenges along the way. And my colleagues have mentioned some of the things that are really critical to get into, to make sure these projects are successes. For us, really, it's important that REDD isn't a fast process, that countries are given the opportunity to really think through the areas that they're going to work in, the project areas, the jurisdictional approaches, so that the outcomes are greater than just the measurement of carbon, which reduces the impact of the project. What we found so far is that the methodologies that have been so far used have been too complex and expensive. We need simpler processes that communities can actually use and upscale themselves, so that really they take the central role in protecting, restoring these watersheds and creating sustainable livelihoods for themselves. What we find is that you can come with a great idea, but if you don't get the sufficient governance structures in place, if you leave, the communities go back to previous really degrading habits, and you really do need to work alongside communities to help them to change how they're using the landscape. So it's very important to work with communities to respect their rights, their culture, and the way that they're creating livelihoods, so you're not putting too much pressure on them to really deliver. They need full and effective participation. They need to be the leaders of these projects. And that requires real investment, which we're not seeing yet, in education, in appropriate governance systems, so thinking outside the box, not just at the national level. In Kenya, we do have some national laws which create perverse incentives to cause further deforestation, so those need to be addressed. But also so that governance from the grassroots is sustainable and creates equitable benefit sharing. And the other thing, of course, that you find is that different users of the forest come from different places. In Kenya in particular, you have some people who move into the forest during periods of stress, and other people who are living alongside the forest. And it's very important to create a system that allows to, that reduces the possibility of conflict in that environment. I think also, just a few other points, checking my time is running out.
You have plenty of time.
Very short.
No, it's fine.
Okay. You know, really to look at biodiversity, to make sure that with our watershed-based approach, we look at sites which are species, where species selection can be done, and that we can plant trees which will really improve that watershed and help improve the riverine area. So I think one of the points that I really need to make at this stage is that plantations are not forests. this must be about indigenous tree planting. I think that some people are finding, because of the methodologies of measuring carbon, it's easier to do it in a monoculture plantation, but that does not actually improve the ecosystem or the conservation of those areas, and it means that communities are often worse off in the longer run. Yeah, just a few more points. I think also drivers of deforestation leakage, if you're working jurisdictionally or even nationally, you'll find that other areas, and I'm sure you all know this, start to be deforested instead. So that it's very important that we look beyond just the jurisdictional area that we're working in. Yeah, so that's pretty much, I think just the main thing for us is that the funding that's coming through so far isn't sufficient. We're using our watershed-based approach so that other types of ideas for funding, such as water funds and others, could help. But I think even then, really the costs associated with doing a project like this are far too high for this to be sustainable at this time.
Yeah, thank you, Francesca. And I think the point about keeping it simple resonates with what we heard from Rosa and from Elsa as well, and not making this too heavy, too complicated is a really important lesson. Just a quick follow-up. To what extent is the Greenbelt movement directly engaging with national level processes, and particularly this legal reform effort that you were talking about as being so important to create the proper context for this effort to move forward?
Yeah, I mean, we've always felt that the national processes are absolutely critical, and we've always worked very closely with national government. Greenbelt movement was involved in the new constitution, which came into being this year with the new government. And that's really looking at devolving power to counties, which will really help in this kind of approach, this jurisdictional approach, looking at giving governance powers and opportunities to people in the local level. We're really far behind Colombia and Mexico in terms of thinking along those parallel and vertical channels, but we're getting the structures in place that you need to do so.
And you see the county government as your key partner in terms of the watershed approach? Yeah, of course the national, but also in terms of the subnational governmental entities. Is it the county level that's the really crucial?
Absolutely, I think county level is really important, but you also have national bodies such as the Kenya Forest Service and the Kenya Wildlife Service, and they're really responsible for these really critical remaining forest areas. So you do need to work with a lot of different stakeholders to be effective. This lighting is fantastic.
No. I don't think I'm controlling the lights, but if I am, please someone come help me. Yes.
So I think that's my
Great.
time is up.
Fantastic. So yes. So Monica, we have the disco lights ready for you. We're going to go strobe in a minute here. This will wake people up. So Monica, you are one of the architects of ACRE's pioneering efforts to build a jurisdictional program for low emissions development across the state, across the whole government. I just had the pleasure of being in ACRE with Monica to see the amazing work that they're doing there. Tell us about that effort and how it fits within the broader context of what's happening in Brazil. You're working with other states in Brazil and sharing across the different states, and particularly from your perspective, the key lessons of the effort to date and the key challenges going forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for the opportunity to bring the ACRE state experience here in this panel. Just to put you in the map, ACRE is the most western Amazonian state in Brazil. In the frontier with Peru and Bolivia, so was usually the most isolated state in Brazil, covers 16 million hectares, and 87% of our territory is still forest. The deforestation in the state affects 13% of our territory, and the main drivers of deforestation are mainly roads and commodity markets for beef, that represent 80% of our converted area. And due to the rule of the rubber in the process of settlement the state, and also the rule of the rubber tappers in making this territory part of Brazil, the forest is a core value for the people in this region. And also the forests represent one of the main assets of the state. So this is why 14 years ago, the policymakers took a decision to change the model of development of the state, trying to promote the economic value of the forest. And our sustainable development model incorporates the vision of integrated management of the forest and the converted areas. So with programs and policies to increase the productivity of the deforested areas and also bring the forest inside of the economy of the states. And this was designed based in the economic and ecological zoning that bring the knowledge needed to plan the future of the state. So planning and the territorial management is a key issue if we are talking about emission reductions and low carbon development. And this is one of the lessons. But control the deforestation is like the stop the Titanic. It's not too easy to do. And it's at state level is even more difficult. And the results from the implementation of this kind of policy as the reduction in the rate of deforestation just became reality in 2006. So we are talking about policies that began implemented 14 years ago, but the results just became in 2006. So well before the discussion about REDD at international level, ACRI already started to implement a comprehensive program to avoid deforestation in the state. And this spirit was needed in order to formulate the ACRI state system for incentive for environmental services that was created by law in 2010. And the CISA law regulates the ACRI carbon program as well. But as you see, we are not talking about direct payments as a benefit sharing. We are talking about incentive that include technology needed to adopt a more sustainable productive activity, so make the transition between the current land use that is based on deforestation to other alternatives that don't need deforestation. And also bring the forest inside of the economy, making reforestation in degraded areas, and reducing the needs to expand the agricultural areas, avoiding deforestation as well. So as we don't have too much natural resources for our economy, the main asset is the forest, so we need to make this forest productive and with economic value. And this concept also came from the consultation process of the carbon program when we was in the designing process. So this was another lesson. We need to listen what is the reality and the needs of the society in order to design better policies. And this was the main recommendation from the consultation process, that people doesn't need payments, direct payments. They need help to change the way of the land use. And this is what we are trying to do there. And so the emission reductions that could result from the policies is the base of our program. And in order to implement this program, also we need to consider the role of the government as a regulator of the program and the system through the Institute of Climate Change, the role of the civil society in the social control, so we create a commission for monitoring and validation the system, and also the role of the scientists. We have one of the members of our scientific committee to assure the quality of the information and bring the knowledge inside of the system, and also the role of the private investment in order to make the connection with the markets, with donors and investors. And I think that the main challenge at the moment is not just thinking about the planning of the state or think about what could be the better policies, but is pass through the process to validate the program. So at this moment, all of the elements needed to design a jurisdictional carbon program is still in development. Baseline, monitoring system, all of these aspects are standardized at project levels, but not at jurisdictional level. And this was one thing that make the connection between the states in Brazil trying to discuss what could be the better approach in order to be integrated with the national strategy. We are a subnational state. We need to consider that in the future we need to be integrated in the national strategy. So we use the same approach of the federal government to define the baseline. We use the same database for monitoring deforestation, etc., to maintain the accountability and to promote the implementation of the nested approach. But also, the standards is not yet defined for jurisdictions. So we have just VCS at the moment that launched the GNR for jurisdictions. So we will be the first time that a jurisdiction was submitted to a standard. This is a very good challenge for us at the moment. The verification bodies also never had experience to assess the jurisdiction. Safeguard also we need to experiment how monitoring this at jurisdictional level, registry system, also how to set up a registry for a jurisdiction. All of these elements are needed to make the integration between the state and the federal government, but also as I think that is needed also for everybody that would like to work with the jurisdictional approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. So just a couple of follow-ups on this. A very, very important point you made here is that ACRE really started with their jurisdictional approach. This is not something that grew up out of an experience with projects, but sort of the whole approach was sui generis from the beginning, that you basically started with the idea of a jurisdictional approach and built it through this consultation process, et cetera. One of the things that's very interesting about the ACRE program, as I understand it, is this public-private company that will engage with the private sector, because sometimes investors are concerned about doing deals with governments and they're worried about, if there are a bunch of emissions reductions from a jurisdictional program, who's going to be the counterparty in that transaction. Could you say a little more about the way ACRE is trying to handle this through the company?
Yes, so the company play the role of the execution of the program and make the connection between the market or non-market mechanisms with the program. And this private-public enterprise is a partnership between a private enterprise with the government. Through this, we can use like a tool in order to make more effective and faster the process of the connection between the donors or investors with the program. It's more easy to execute activities through the company rather than through the government because it's the bureaucracy. But it's not isolated from the system. So the company, even as a private-public enterprise, is submitted to the control of the Commission of Validation and Monitoring that have half of the members from the government and half of the members from the civil society. So we need to think in the role of everything. So we just think in the private-public enterprise like a tool to make faster and effective the connection with the market. And we create all of the regulation this year to make this company able to work in the manage of the environmental assets as like the carbon credits.
Yeah. One more too. So given your experience, and you're right in the middle of this right now in terms of validation with VCS and the safeguards work and the registry work, all of the infrastructure that you need to get your jurisdictional program up and running. You've been working night and day on this, I know, and have a lot of lessons, I assume, for the next jurisdiction that may come after you and are trying to think about the way forward here. What are the key recommendations that you would make based on the experience of ACRE in going through the validation and building the different things that you need to build to make the program work? How can you make it simpler and easier the next time? Because if your jurisdiction is having a hard time doing all of this, then it's not clear that other jurisdictions are going to have an easier time. They may have an even more difficult time.
Well, we have a really challenged moment. I can say that we are in the 17 seconds of the game.
Yeah, the overtime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that sometimes all of this experience with projects, people just trying to scale it up to the jurisdiction perspective. And sometimes we forgot that in the jurisdiction, maybe we can avoid many risks that the projects could bring. Yeah. And this is why it's impossible just to scale it up, the project approach to the jurisdiction, because we need to consider that it's based in policies, in public policies, in another kind of institutional framework, legal framework that supports this kind of approach. And sometimes it's difficult to change the mind, and to make it simple, all of these elements needs to consider what is behind a jurisdictional approach. And sometimes those elements, or for example, standards, they are sometimes don't think about what is behind a jurisdiction that could support this kind of approach. So I could recommend that simplify the concepts of baselines, monitoring system. It's impossible for a jurisdiction measure every single tree in the country or in the state. How we will measure, what kind of metric we will use, needs to be more simple rather than just put so many requirements and many details that could just we can lose the motivation of the countries just thinking about all of the work that is needed in the technical aspects, rather than just think in the core that this change the model of development of the state to assure the emission reductions.
Yeah. So I think that's a really important point, that we don't want to think of the jurisdictional approach as just a bigger project, right? It's not. It's qualitatively different than project approaches. And we've all been in the world of projects for a long time, and somehow we need to get out of that thinking and start thinking about the economies and the efficiencies that can come from the jurisdictional approach. Not to say that there are not tremendous challenges with the jurisdictional approach, but it is different. It's not just a big project. Let me ask a follow-up to the panel, and thank you all very much for your opening remarks. Those were great. Elsa, what does success look like to you for your efforts with municipalities in Colombia? So given your work over the years on this, if you had to sort of step back and say, what does success look like? What does success look like for you?
Tenemos éxitos, pero también muchísimos retos para seguir adelante. Digamos, el éxito más grande que hemos tenido ha sido lograr involucrar 2 municipios en un departamento que se llama Antioquia, donde los 2 alcaldes se comprometieron a ser municipios carbono cero. Pero ¿qué pasa realmente? Es que yo creo que pasa en todos nuestros países, y es en el momento en que cambia el gobierno, cambian las prioridades y no hay continuidad de estos proyectos, al no ser una política de Estado, sino ser un interés, dijéramos, del momento y del mandatario. O sea uno de nuestros grandes retos, porque cuando estamos hablando de municipios verdes y como lo decía muy bien Mónica, va mucho más allá de proyecto y es realmente crear toda una conciencia y poner al sector privado, poner al gobierno, al ciudadano común, a pensar en cuál es una economía baja en carbono, cuáles son sus prácticas que tiene que cambiar, cuáles son las grandes inversiones que tiene que hacer cada uno de los municipios. Esto tiene que ser a largo plazo y tiene que ser con grandes inversiones. Entonces, hemos tenido, digamos, uno de nuestros logros que fue algo pequeño pero muy interesante en uno de los municipios verdes, es que fue el primer municipio que utilizó las bicicletas como transporte público. Entonces fue después ya otras ciudades, Bogotá, Medellín, lo han adoptado, pero este era un municipio pequeño donde el alcalde le propusimos que hiciera todo el sistema de bicicletas y lo hizo. Se necesita, quiero más que los, de pronto, William, más de hablar de los, de todos esos, de los éxitos, porque los éxitos todavía no los estamos recogiendo, vuelvo a repetir, esos grandes retos que hay. El reto realmente que propuestas como todas las que estamos hablando sean recogidas desde los gobiernos centrales, haya modelos que podamos replicar, modelos que podamos monitorear, que podamos contabilizar, modelos donde estemos demostrando que realmente la inversión que se está haciendo en unos cambios sustanciales valen muchísimo más que la inversión hecha. ¿Cómo hacemos realmente unos paisajes mucho menos vulnerables, mucho más productivos, mucho más amables? ¿Cómo hacemos sociedades mucho más felices? Entonces, son grandes retos, son pequeños éxitos que vamos teniendo, que se pueden ir sumando, pero de pronto el mensaje es cómo le apostamos todos a hacer unas sociedades diferentes, unas sociedades menos vulnerables, unas sociedades más equitativas, que todo esto tiene que ver con REDD, todo esto tiene que ver con cambio climático.
Thank you very much. Francesca, I want to go to you. So you're at the REDD Exchange in the next REDD Exchange, 2-3 years, whenever it is, or some other event, you're up on stage. And what does success look like to you, you know, in the 3 to 5 year time period for what you're doing?
Yeah, I think for us, success for this kind of project is definitely around restoration and protection of the remaining indigenous forests in Kenya, and a good system in place to do so at the national level right down to jurisdictional. But also that goes hand in hand with development and poverty alleviation. If you look at what the challenges that rural women and rural people in Kenya face, you can see that unless that issue is addressed directly, you will not see deforestation stopping. So those two issues cannot be separated. But we would like to see resilient communities, and resilient both from the livelihood side and from the climate change and ecological perspective. Yeah.
Great. Rosa, what does success look like in Mexico in 3-5 years from now?
Well, what I wish that happened, maybe. I think the main challenge for us is working with the other sectors and trying to link the policies with the market. I mean, in a way that is more equitable for those in the communities. I think that giving value to the forest it's very important, and for that we need that the forests work for the people, and the policies has to be alienated to support that process. So that's working with other sectors, private sector, but also agricultural sector in Mexico is very, very important. And that is something that we are try to put our efforts for the next few years.
So let me stay on that for a second then. There's all this enthusiasm around sustainable supply chains and getting deforestation out of commodities. Do you see an opportunity here with the jurisdictional approach to REDD and low emissions development, sort of combining that with some of these sustainable supply chain efforts? And how viable is that in the Mexico context?
It is for some activities that we are now finding that if you can put together a series of policies that facilitate investment from the private sector or to reduce regulations. There is a lot of regulations for private investment in Mexico. Like, for example, we have the very specific case of resin. There is a company, a big company in Mexico that needs a supply of resin for their products. And they find all the regulations put by the environmental ministry very, very difficult to fulfill. So if we facilitate the permits and all that for this type of investment going to the communities, and then the fair agreement of this market to really purchase this product for long term in a good price, then I think it will start like, no? So then the government has a role, of course, in monitoring, of course, in providing looking at the permits and the process of regulations to be more accessible for all parties, and the good agreements, good contracts between the company and the communities. And we're looking at very interesting processes on that. Also in the coffee sector, there is also good opportunities for that. So I think, yes, it is possible, but it requires combination of different stakeholders to agree.
And are those conversations starting to happen in Mexico?
Yeah, are happening already.
And are the states involved in that as well, the state governments?
The state government is not that involved yet. Mm-hmm. It's more the federal government because a lot of the regulations for forestry are federal. Yeah. So that's the current situation on that.
And what about within the states? Do you see the conversation broadening out across different departments beyond just the environmental department?
Well, that is something happening. We have in Mexico what we call the Interministerial Commission for Climate Change, and in that area, some of the states, REDD is very important because there are a lot of forests, and we have a lot of communities that depend on forests. So in those states where forest and rural development is core, we have now more increase of this communication with the other sectors, with the other ministries, trying to align their policies. So that is also, as I said in the beginning of this intervention, our effort now is on that, and how to bring agriculture sector into these discussions, because they are main factors for changing deforestation patterns. And also many of these states are, as in Kenya, the policies are driven related to poverty reduction activities. No? So we need to look at those policies and also trying to make it more integrated and more environmentally sensitive, so we can really bring together all the purposes of development, poverty alleviation, but also reduction of emissions and biodiversity.
Great, thank you. Monica, 5 years from now, what does success look like for Acre? You will be on a beach somewhere, resting and recovering from all the hard work. But
yeah, a lot of hope.
Yeah.
Well, I think that for Acre could be the improve of our economic and social indicators, including obviously also the reduction in the deforestation, but mainly is the result of the implementation of the public policies. So if we could see the success of the program, will we see the money coming from REDD helping the state achieve every single family in the state to improve our social and economic indicators in the state. So I think that this will be the success of the program.
That's great. So I want to open it up to the audience. We've heard their sort of vision of success here. I want to come back at the very end to the way forward and who needs to do what. So panelists be thinking about that, and we'll come back to that at the very end. I should also mention that the next session on jurisdictional approaches will go deeper on this connection with sustainable supply chains that Dan Nepstad is leading, I think, in this room in the next session. So stay tuned. The whole conversation will continue. All right, so I see a number of hands here. I've got the gentleman right here in the front, and that's a little bit of a glare. And if you could please stand up and give us your name and affiliation.
Thank you. My name is Yunus Yumde. I'm come from Papua, Indonesia, Samdana Institute. What I'm worrying about and my understanding is jurisdictional approach is very much influenced by political interests. In some countries, which is law is the base, maybe the parties, many parties like us in Indonesia. I would like to know from, maybe some of you might able to help me to give an overview, how we can deal with this condition and ensure that political interest is not very much influence all the process of jurisdictional at all level. Thank you.
So the question is how to insulate the jurisdictional approach from political interests.
Yep, because it's very much influence.
Yeah. That's a hard one. Monica, you want to start? And I think maybe you could also use this as an opportunity to talk about the broader point about political viability and the challenge of elections and turnover going forward.
Yeah, this is a good challenge and a good question, of course. We are dealing with this at this moment. We are running for elections next year. And so how we can keep the program besides this political interest? If one of the things that could be done is present this initiative not just like environmental policy. This is more than that. At jurisdictional level, it's economic policy. It's not just environmental policy. We are talking about economy. And economy is the main reason of every single government. They need to give answer of the civil society. So if we could make the programs brings results for the state and for the civil society, it could be one of the main objectives of any kind of party continue to maintain the program, because it will be an interest of every single party to maintain something that bring benefits for the society, and just not close the program just because it's high costly and doesn't bring benefits. So if we are talking about economy and we are talking about improved social benefits for this society, I think that it could be attractive for any kind of party in the state. And this is one of the challenges in the state at the moment, because we have spent 4 years trying to implement the program. Obviously, it's based on policies that are implemented through many years. But for just the carbon programs needs to demonstrate that can create fluxes money enough to make rise the way of implementation of the policies that could achieve every single community in the state. If we cannot do that, it will be a high costly program, and we already do this just in a slowly way, but we are already do.
And Francesca, you want to add something to that?
I just want to add something quickly, because I know a lot of people have got questions. I just wanted to say that our organization is around, we see our work as being about education and community empowerment, and it's a social change model. So it's really important, I think, to make sure that the work that you're doing is understood and really embraced by civil society, that they feel that this is something that they have buy-in to. And I think that really helps in political processes, that will then also encourage politicians to take the work that you're doing seriously and to hopefully not derail all the hard work that you've done.
Yeah. So in some ways, I mean, a viable jurisdictional approach has to emerge out of the political process and has to generate benefits for communities and for politicians who have to run for re-election. Otherwise, they walk away at some point. I don't know if...
This is really about implementing, about really showing concrete, real results that actually change people's lives. So I think if you can get that right, then you'll see there'll be buy-in, hopefully.
Did you want to add anything, Elsa?
Sí, creo que si bien no se puede utilizar como una bandera política de un partido determinado, el involucramiento de los políticos, el conocimiento de los políticos es fundamental porque finalmente los políticos son los que hacen las leyes, los políticos son los que toman decisiones y no sé en el resto de los países, pero en Colombia el medio ambiente no da votos. La parte del trabajo ambiental no da votos y uno de los grandes retos es convencer de la importancia social, ambiental, económica, política a los políticos de este tipo de acciones que estamos haciendo.
Great. Thank you, Elsa. Other questions? Right here in the middle.
Hello, my name is Jeff Hayward. I'm with the Rainforest Alliance, and great discussion so far. One of the things that I'm hearing from the panel is that the real power of jurisdictional approaches is the way to change policies and measures of governments, and that will transform land use practices. And what Rosa Maria mentioned, which was really intriguing around this, was the perverse incentives around some subsidies and subsidy programs. And I think we all recognize that subsidies often don't make a lot of economic sense, but they can be really popular. And so I wanted to hear a little bit more from you as to what specific measures are being implemented in Chiapas to change subsidy programs, how the government's responding, and who might be the winners and losers from those trade-offs.
Rosa.
Bueno, I'm sorry. The main, the core of the REDD vision at federal level is linking or aligning sectors. And it has been discussed that a lot of deforestation is coming by the subsidies given by SAGARPA, that is the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock. So one of the experiments that is happening in the country is through these juntas intermunicipales and through what is called the early actions organized by CONAFOR. They're trying to bring some of the money that has been given to subsidies for cattle, put it in a way that is more organized with the other investments like forestry or reducing the production of livestock, like intensify those activities through different practices. Okay, so it's now in a kind of experimental stage, and at the same time, what we are doing is trying to see how we can have a more strong participation of the state to decide on how the subsidies can be allocated at the ground. Because right now the federal government is the one deciding, even it's in Chiapas, they decide where and how to spend the money that is coming from the federal government. But the states have the right to say something or to change that allocation, but they don't take advantage of that power. So they have to really use the power that they have in the law for changing the way that the subsidies are coming. And it's already in evidence. We have mapped all those subsidies, and it's already an evidence of how these subsidies are really affecting deforestation. So you can see municipalities with high rates of deforestation, the ones that have received more of this type of money. And it's not that the money is not coming, but the what we call the definition of the programs, the way that the people can access this money has to change, the rules and the type of activities that are financed. So that's the stage in which things are happening. It's very difficult because subsidies are also a way to keep people, like it could be used for voting purposes, could be used for the parties. So it's a lot of money. So that's something that the politicians are not easy to give up.
Great. No, did you want to add something to that, Elsa? No. Very important question, and raises the point of, the importance of domestic policies and finance as the big sort of levers of change here, in terms of changing behavior and not necessarily penalizing, but also rewarding to some extent. And the Municipes Verdes program in Pará, for example, I think is a good example of some of that. Another question over here, this woman here.
Hello, hi. Amy Duchel from C4. This is a great session, thank you. I think some of the most inspiring stories from REDD have come from these sort of subnational, jurisdictional examples. And I'm just wondering, if in the end, measurement, reporting, and verification has to happen at national levels, whether for carbon or non-carbon, is there a risk that some of these subnational advances could be disregarded or not taken into account in terms of national frameworks? I mean, I think Monica gave some nice examples of trying to align some of the subnational and national efforts, but if there are risks, how could those be mitigated to really learn from and incorporate these kinds of lessons in national frameworks?
So preserving the value and the positive stories around and examples and experiences around subnational efforts in these larger national frameworks as they get built. Monica, did you want to respond to that?
Tricky question, considering that we have representative for the federal government here.
But he's from the finance ministry, right?
Yes, this is a good guy. Yeah, obviously, we are talking about, and Brazil is a federation of states. So we can maintain our approach, but we need to consider that any kind of a strategy or any kind of law at national level, we will need to respect. At the moment, we don't have national legislation that prohibits the state to design or implement any kind of a strategy at subnational level. But this is why it's so important for the subnational jurisdiction to predict this kind of integration with the federal government when we are designing the program, in order to design the elements needed for this integration, to maintain the accountability between the state and national level. But the most important, beside the jurisdictional programs, is more than just the accountability of the carbon credits or the emission reductions. We are talking about design policies. And this is one of the opportunities of the federal government, that the states, in the case of Brazil, all the Amazonian states have the commitment to work on emission reductions. And this is not a problem, it's an opportunity. And because could be worse if this Brazilian state, the Amazonian states, don't want or don't have this kind of commitment and is running in the opposite way. I think that we need to take into account, obviously, any kind of strategy in the future that could prohibit the state to do that, but I think that it will be very, very later if something come in this aspect. But I think that as the Mr. Carlos Klink yesterday talked, they are trying to design a strategy at the moment taking in account the states. So we are trying to dialogue with the federal government. We obviously, it's a hard dialogue, but it's still a dialogue. So I think that politically also will be not so good for the federal government just prohibit the state to do something.
Rosa, you want to add to that?
Yeah, learning from ACRE experience and listening all the debates in Brazil, we decided in Mexico to go slow on that regards. And so we are working very closely with the process that is building the MRB system at national level. And as I said before, we just had a meeting last week in which we agree, finally, after several meetings, very specific steps for nesting the state level systems to the national. I think that right now it's a better environment in Mexico for considering the participation of the states. Now, for example, the CONAFOR, after our previous efforts, they are calling for what they call the REDD states, no? So they are having now regular meetings with them so they can start like providing the inputs for the state strategies to be nested with the national. So we feel that we are in the correct path for having an agreement on that.
And so just to be clear, you looked at what was happening in Brazil to some extent and said, okay, we need to slow down and think about this vertical alignment because we have the opportunity to do this in a slightly different way, and from the beginning get the federal government and the states talking together. And this is a very interesting feature of federal systems in a sense, right? With Acre and Brazil, they're states that are moving ahead, they're innovating, and we don't want to kill that innovation, obviously, with a national level approach. We want to create something that can accommodate all of that. In Mexico, it's a different dynamic in part because you had the opportunity to sort of look at what was going on there and start with the conversation.
Yeah, and I think that it's a changing of understanding that REDD is a very complicated thing, and really reducing deforestation is not going to happen by a decree. It's not going to happen by a federal government sending some few support or money or special programs to specific sites. You really need everyone to participate. And that's, I think, the change that has happened in Mexico is that it's more accepted. The law, the national law recognizes the role of the states in a general way. It doesn't go to very specific aspects, but the regulations that we can build can add those aspects. So that is, I think that there is an environment that is more supportive to the involvement of the states.
Great. Bill, William.
William Sunderland, I'm with C4. My question is to any of the panelists who might want to answer it, and it concerns tenure. My question is, in the jurisdictional approach of REDD, what are the opportunities, to what extent are there opportunities for establishing an appropriate tenure foundation for REDD? And what are the limitations? The background of my question is in C4's Global Comparative Study on REDD. We're working at 23 subnational initiatives, most of which are at the project level. And for most of these projects, the biggest problem is tenure. And our working hypothesis is one of the big limitations is that at the project level, you do not have access to the levers of power, access to policymakers for implementing change in the way that you would at the jurisdictional level. So any insights you can offer us are most welcome on this topic. Thanks.
So jurisdictional approach as an opportunity to resolve the tenure question. Do you want to start? Elsa.
Sí, William, gracias. Creo que es una gran oportunidad para poner juntos todas las cosas de que hemos estado hablando, de hacer, vuelvo a decir, paisajes que sean y ciudades que sean mucho más resilientes hacia un fenómeno que es un hecho, que es el fenómeno del cambio climático. Sin embargo, vemos que hay muchísimos, pero muchísimos retos. Los hemos mencionado también, los mencionas tú, y es el de bueno, primero el de despertar el interés de los gobiernos centrales. Hay algo, por lo menos en Colombia, que vemos la falta de participación de realmente toda una sociedad, porque esto no es un problema del gobierno, no es un problema de las ONGs, es un problema de tomar conciencia y cambiar y modificar las actitudes de todos los miembros de una municipalidad o de un país. Vemos como otro de esos grandes riesgos el de la falta de continuidad. La falta de continuidad por los gobiernos, la falta de dejar de ser una política de Estado y ser simplemente un proyecto o un interés del gobernante del momento. La falta de una apuesta realmente a hacer un modelo invirtiendo recursos que van a ser unos recursos que van a ser mucho más las ganancias mucho más de lo que se invierte. Pero hay una gran oportunidad cuando vemos en este trabajo a nivel de municipalidad y es la integración de todos los factores, es también, como hemos venido hablando, es proponer al mismo tiempo una producción sostenible, una producción que se abra al mercado con unos valores diferenciados, unos procesos de restauración ecológica donde se vuelvan a prestar los servicios ambientales de esos bosques iniciales, áreas de conservación a través del municipio, las áreas o los parques municipales o las reservas de la sociedad civil. Pero yo creo que lo más importante es la posibilidad de que todo el mundo esté informado y todo el mundo a través de esa información cambie su conciencia. Yo creo que nos falta mucho información, nos falta mucho, no tanto nos falta información, sino divulgar esa información y ver la oportunidad que cada uno tiene al ser parte de un proceso que es a muy largo plazo y que se puede sentir cada uno orgulloso de ser parte de él.
Anyone else? Monica.
Thank you. Yes, William, it's a good opportunity to resolve the land tenure. If we are talking about jurisdictional approach that is based on public policies, one of the tools to facilitate the control and enforcement will be define the line tenure. And there are a huge effort, not only at the state level, but at the federal level with many kind of programs and a huge of investment trying to resolve the land tenure in many states. But this is challenges as well. It's not too easy, but we are starting by the zoning, identifying what are the areas that we need to work or focus on this activity. And for control deforestation, obviously, will be a good tool for control and enforcement any kind of activity. And obviously, it's one of the commitment of the jurisdictional program as well.
Rosa wanted to add something on this too.
Well, as everybody knows, the areas with the land conflicts are probably areas with high deforestation also. So it's totally related to providing more security to the land. But those, I mean, I think what REDD is bringing, and that's why I said in the beginning that it's pushing a lot of structural changes, is the question of how to find ways of areas that have conflicts for many, many years. Like in Mexico, you probably know we have a very good agrarian system. 80% of the forests are in the hands of communities, but still we have many sites, very important areas, indigenous lands, that have a lot of land conflicts. So what some of the ideas that are coming recently is trying to find like intermediary situations, like finding ways in which agreements can be reached, even if tenure is not solved as given titles to the communities, but at least to provide security for a long period of time. Could be 30 years or more. So the communities can decide and do the investment in their lands. And also they can have access to the programs, the public programs, because many of these communities cannot have access to public programs because they don't have titles. So it is an issue that is now coming in, trying to find solutions like other type of arrangements like concessions or other type of land agreements, even easements, for example, that can provide this type of security. So it's an issue, it's not easy, as Monica says, but I think it's, of course, it's one of the potentials of involving the jurisdictions instead of working at project level.
Yeah. Francesca, did you want to add anything on this? Oh, good. I saw one more question. We'll take it. I'll take the moderator's prerogative to stretch us out for another minute or so since we started a little bit late. So one final question.
I'm Sisai. I'm working for the Norwegian Embassy in Ethiopia. I'd like to know if there is any displacement of activities from this jurisdictional approach, if some of activities are displaced to other states, for example. So that could be a reason for conflict between two states, leakage, for example. Can I add one more question?
Sure, you're going to ask two questions.
Yes.
Okay.
So
You may only get an answer to one, though.
REDD is a long-term plan, 20, 25 years maybe. As I can understand, most of you are NGOs or civil societies. Do you have any kind of plan to establish an entity that can steer the whole process so that when you are gone, the program continues? Thank you.
Francesca.
So those are really good questions. And on the second one, it's one of the issues that we've really grappled with from the beginning, because we're talking generational. We wanted those trees to be standing for generations. And in Kenya law and the Forest Act, there are community forest associations. And we've really done a lot of work to educate people about how to form these legal structures and what they can do within them, so that it's not just around one family or one group of people's interests, but that people who are nearby that forest can actually join and be part of how that forest stewardship happens. So I think that's one aspect of REDD that we've thought a lot about. I hope the NGO, I mean, it'd be great if we were out of business, but it's possible for the NGO still to be there too. And we see our role as being a very important facilitatory role, because there isn't that link between government and communities is not there. And we see ourselves as a third party who's neutral and who can really act for the good of the public good, the forest, and also to help address conflict. So when you have different land uses for the forest, I mentioned when I was speaking around some of the pastoralists come into the forest during drought periods, and they need to use the forest during that time as a resource. And then you have agricultural communities who have a different relationship with that forest. And that's a potential area of conflict that we see as absolutely vital to address, and to make sure that communities respect each other and that the common good is protected as well. So.
Great, thank you. 10 seconds each. The way forward, who needs to do what? Monica, starting with you. The way forward and who needs to do what for you and your efforts.
Okay.
10 seconds.
10 seconds, my goodness. I couldn't think.
I told you this question was coming. Francis did too.
So the next steps are going through the validation of VCS, trying to test it. And obviously there are many responsibilities, and we are in a joint work between the government and the partners to do and accomplish with the requirements, and show that the program can be validated through a standard.
Great. Francesca.
Well, one of the things that I've been most excited about during this conference is really the learning from other Southern organizations, and I think that is the way forward. I think we need to work together and have more exchanges of knowledge. This is a really emerging area, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned from each other. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to continue this dialogue. I think that's the way forward. We're not going to be able to solve all the problems right here, but we can continue to explore and what to do together.
Great. Rosa.
I think that the donor community has to look at the jurisdictional level and subnational and trying to support these early actions. As ACRE has shown, it's very difficult. We can learn very fast from what is happening, not to duplicate, but we need the support for doing that. And also we need to support more this networking among the NGOs. As you have seen, we are here 3 nonprofit organizations that we are doing a lot of this work. As you already said, we're the glue on all of the stakeholders.
Great. Elsa.
El municipio como ese modelo donde todas las actividades integradas se llevan a cabo, y para eso necesitamos apoyo del gobierno central y del gobierno regional, apoyo de la cooperación internacional, apoyo para difundir el modelo, creación de conciencia a nivel de país de la importancia de esta, y empezar a mirar y trabajar todos los componentes de manera integrada sin dejar ninguno por fuera.
Great. Thank you all very much. Let's give a big round of applause to the panel here, and thank you all very much, too. Excellent. Thank you. Thanks for indulging us for a couple of minutes. I think there's a coffee break now. See you at the next panel. It was great.